Dr. Velnara stood in the center of the advanced xenobiology laboratory, watching her students file in with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The room itself was a marvel of galactic technology, with examination tables that could adjust to any species' needs and scanning equipment that could peer into the molecular structure of any known life form. Today would be different from their usual classes studying common galactic species. Today, they would examine something that had puzzled scientists across the galaxy for decades. The students represented the diversity of the Galactic Medical Consortium. Hyun moved gracefully across the floor, her crystalline body catching and refracting the laboratory lights into beautiful rainbow patterns. Her species, the Veltai, were known for their precise analytical minds and their ability to process information at incredible speeds. Sue floated nearby, contained within her specialized atmospheric suit that maintained the exact gas mixture her species needed to survive. The Nethari were gaseous beings of remarkable intelligence, capable of complex thought processes that even amazed other advanced species. Jin slithered forward on his powerful reptilian body, his scales glistening under the bright lights. The Saurid people were natural healers with an instinctive understanding of biological systems that made them excellent medical students. Tay clicked her way across the room, her insectoid legs making precise tapping sounds on the metal floor. Her compound eyes could see spectrums of light invisible to most other species, making her invaluable for detailed biological analysis. The other students included beings from the fungal networks of Spore Prime, the energy-based entities from the Plasma Nebulae, and several other species that had joined the galactic community over the past century. Each brought unique perspectives and abilities to their medical studies, but today all their attention focused on the examination tables at the center of the room. 3 human bodies lay there, recently deceased in various galactic conflicts. The Galactic Medical Consortium had managed to acquire these specimens through official channels, and they represented the first opportunity for many species to study human biology up close. Dr. Velnara had been teaching xenobiology for over 50 standard years. She had dissected beings from hundreds of different worlds and thought she had seen every possible variation of life that the galaxy could produce. But humans had always remained a mystery to her. They came from a world that most galactic databases classified as unremarkable. Earth's gravity was moderate, its atmosphere was standard, and its climate fell within normal ranges. There was nothing about their home planet that should have produced such unusual beings. The initial scans began immediately. Hyun positioned herself near the first specimen, her crystalline form allowing her to channel scanning energy through her body. With perfect precision, the readings that appeared on the displays made her shimmer with confusion. The bone density measurements showed numbers that shouldn't have been possible for a species that evolved under Earth's gravity. These bones were denser than those of species that lived on high-gravity worlds where the pressure was 3 times greater than Earth's. Jin moved to examine the muscular system of the second specimen. His natural healing abilities let him understand biological efficiency in ways that mechanical scanners couldn't match. What he discovered made his scales ripple with disbelief. The human muscle fibers were arranged in patterns that achieved maximum power output with minimum energy expenditure. The efficiency ratings were so high that they violated several established principles of biological energy conversion. Sue floated over to the third specimen, her gaseous form allowing her to analyze the chemical composition of human tissues at a molecular level. The readings she gathered made her atmospheric suit flicker with excitement and concern. The human cells showed signs of adaptability that exceeded anything in their extensive xenobiological databases. These weren't just efficient cells. They were cells that seemed capable of changing their function based on environmental pressures. Tay focused her compound eyes on the neural pathways visible in the brain tissue samples. Her species had studied countless nervous systems throughout the galaxy, but the human brain structure was like nothing she had ever encountered. The neural density was extraordinary, with connections forming patterns that suggested information processing capabilities far beyond what should have been possible for the brain's size. The other students gathered around, each contributing their unique perspectives to the growing puzzle. The fungal network students noted that human cellular communication resembled their own species' ability to share information across vast distances. The energy beings detected unusual electromagnetic signatures in human tissues that suggested some form of bioelectric enhancement. As the initial examination continued, Dr. Velnara watched her students' expressions change from curiosity to confusion to something approaching fear. The readings they were gathering didn't just challenge their understanding of human biology. They challenged fundamental principles of how life was supposed to work in the galaxy. The preliminary data painted a picture of a species that shouldn't have been able to exist, let alone thrive in the dangerous environment of galactic civilization. Yet humans had not only survived their first contact with alien species, they had quickly become one of the most influential forces in galactic politics and warfare. The laboratory had become a place of constant discovery over the past 3 weeks. What started as routine xenobiological research had transformed into something that kept the students working late into the night cycles, driven by findings that challenged everything they thought they knew about life in the galaxy. Yoon had been spending most of her time hunched over the quantum microscope, her reptilian eyes perfectly adapted to see the minute details that the advanced equipment revealed. She had examined cellular structures from hundreds of species during her medical training, but human cells were unlike anything she had ever encountered. The mitochondria, those tiny powerhouses that existed in most life forms throughout the galaxy, operated at efficiency levels that made her question whether the equipment was malfunctioning. She ran the tests again and again, checking and rechecking her procedures. The results remained consistent and impossible. Human mitochondria converted nutrients into usable energy at rates that exceeded theoretical maximums by enormous margins. It was like discovering that a simple combustion engine could somehow produce more energy than the fuel it consumed. The laws of biological thermodynamics suggested this should be impossible, yet the evidence was right there under her microscope. But the energy conversion rates were only the beginning of what made human cells so extraordinary. Each individual cell seemed to possess an awareness of its environment that bordered on intelligence. When Yoon exposed tissue samples to different chemical compounds, she watched in amazement as the cells began producing specific enzymes to neutralize threats within minutes. This wasn't the slow process of evolutionary adaptation that took generations to develop. This was happening in real time, right before her eyes. Min had taken a different approach to understanding human biology. She had requested access to specimens from humans who had died in various hostile environments, believing that studying death might help her understand life. Her gaseous form allowed her to analyze tissue samples at a molecular level that other species couldn't achieve. What she discovered in those samples fundamentally changed her understanding of how biological systems responded to extreme stress. The first set of samples came from humans who had been exposed to the vacuum of space during a battle near the Frontier Nebula. Space exposure was universally fatal to known galactic species within seconds. The vacuum would cause blood to boil, tissues to swell, and death to occur almost instantly. But these human samples told a different story. The cells had begun modifying their membrane structures within the first few seconds of exposure, attempting to maintain pressure differentials that could have allowed survival in vacuum conditions. Even more remarkable were the samples from humans killed by radiation exposure during the mining conflicts on Kepler Station. Radiation damage was one of the most feared hazards in space, capable of destroying cellular DNA and causing inevitable death. Yet the human samples showed evidence of rapid DNA repair mechanisms that had been working overtime to fix radiation damage. Some cells had even begun producing protective compounds that could have shielded other parts of the body from further radiation harm. The most disturbing samples came from victims of chemical warfare during the recent conflicts with the Hive Collective. The Hive used biological toxins that were specifically designed to be universally lethal, compounds that could kill any known form of carbon-based life within minutes. But the human samples revealed that their bloodstreams had begun producing neutralizing agents almost immediately after exposure. The bodies were literally creating antidotes to poisons they had never encountered before. Sue spent hours floating around the laboratory, her atmospheric suit humming as she processed the implications of their discoveries. Her gaseous form rippled with excitement as she shared her observations with the team. The humans weren't just adapting to survive in hostile environments, they were evolving solutions to problems in real time. Each body had become a biological laboratory, frantically working to overcome whatever was killing it. The pattern was consistent across every sample they examined. Human biology didn't just respond to threats, it anticipated them. Cells would begin producing protective compounds before damage occurred. Immune systems would develop resistances to toxins within hours of first exposure. Neural pathways would reroute around damaged areas faster than should have been possible. Hyun's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep concern as she processed the data. Her species had spent millions of years developing their current biological efficiency through careful evolutionary processes. The idea that another species could achieve similar or superior adaptations within hours challenged everything the Veltai understood about biological development. The research team found themselves working longer hours, driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing unease. They were no longer just studying an alien species. They were uncovering evidence of biological capabilities that seemed to defy natural law. The humans appeared to possess some form of directed evolution, as if their bodies could consciously choose how to adapt to new challenges. Late-night discussions in the laboratory became intense debates about the implications of their findings. If humans could evolve this rapidly, what did it mean for other species who came into contact with them? How had they developed such capabilities? And most importantly, what did this mean for the future of galactic civilization? The breakthrough came when Dr. Velnara granted the research team access to classified military archives that had been sealed for decades. These weren't the sanitized reports available to the general galactic public, but raw intelligence data collected from actual battlefields across multiple star systems. What the students discovered in those digital vaults would haunt their understanding of human capabilities forever. Jin was the first to uncover the disturbing patterns. His natural analytical abilities, enhanced by his species' instinctive understanding of biological systems, allowed him to spot connections that others might have missed. He spent days combing through battle reports from the Shard Wars, conflicts that had taken place nearly 2 centuries ago when humanity first encountered the crystalline Veltai Empire. The Veltai had been confident of victory when the wars began. Their crystalline armor was legendary throughout the galaxy, capable of deflecting energy weapons and absorbing kinetic impacts that would destroy conventional materials. For over 1,000 years, no species had found an effective way to counter Veltai defensive capabilities. Their warriors seemed nearly invincible, protected by living crystal that could repair itself and adapt to different types of attacks. But the human forces had surprised everyone. Initial battles went as expected, with human weapons proving largely ineffective against crystalline defenses. However, by the 3rd month of fighting, something changed. Jin found medical reports describing human soldiers who had begun producing specialized enzymes in their saliva and bloodstream. These biological compounds could dissolve crystalline structures at the molecular level. The transformation hadn't happened to just a few soldiers. Entire human battalions had simultaneously developed this capability. Medical officers recorded that human biology had somehow analyzed the crystal composition and created specific biological agents to counter it. Within 6 months, the supposedly invincible Veltai armor became useless against human forces. Tay made equally disturbing discoveries while researching the Hive collective conflicts. Her compound eyes allowed her to process multiple data streams simultaneously, and she had been examining reports from various insectoid species that had fought alongside or against humans during the swarm invasions. The Hive collective was notorious for their biological warfare capabilities. They produced toxins that could kill most galactic species within seconds, compounds so potent that even trace exposure meant certain death. Their chitinous warriors were living weapons, capable of releasing clouds of deadly chemicals that could clear entire battlefields. Initially, human forces suffered devastating casualties when they first encountered Hive warfare. Entire companies would be wiped out by a single Hive warrior releasing toxins into the air. Military strategists assumed that humans would be forced to retreat from any conflict involving the collective. But Tay found reports that told a very different story. By the fourth engagement with hive forces, human soldiers began showing immunity to toxins that had been lethal just weeks earlier. Medical examinations revealed that human immune systems had not only developed resistances to known hive compounds, but had begun producing neutralizing agents for toxins they hadn't even encountered yet. The most disturbing reports came from conflicts with psychic species like the Mindweavers. These beings possessed mental abilities that could crush the consciousness of most galactic species without physical contact. They could invade minds, manipulate thoughts, and drive enemies insane from across vast distances. Psychic warfare was considered the ultimate expression of evolved consciousness. Yoon discovered classified reports from Mindweaver commanders describing their complete bewilderment at human resistance to psychic attacks. During the first encounters, humans had been as vulnerable as any other species to mental manipulation. But as conflicts continued, human soldiers began developing mental barriers that psychic species had never encountered before. Even more shocking were reports of humans manifesting retaliatory psionic abilities. Soldiers with no previous psychic training were suddenly capable of mental attacks that could stun or even kill Mindweaver warriors. These abilities appeared to develop specifically in response to psychic assault, as if human consciousness could learn to fight back using the same methods being used against it. Min processed the data with growing alarm, her gaseous form rippling with patterns that indicated extreme distress. The evidence painted a picture that challenged everything the galactic community understood about biological development and evolutionary processes. Humans weren't just adapting to survive different environments. They were actively evolving countermeasures to every advantage their enemies possessed. The pattern was consistent across every conflict in the archives. Human forces would enter wars at a significant disadvantage, often suffering initial defeats that suggested certain annihilation. But as battles continued, human biology would begin responding to whatever advantages their enemies possessed. Energy-based. Species found humans developing energy absorption capabilities. Aquatic species discovered humans could rapidly adapt to underwater combat. Even mechanical species reported humans developing electromagnetic pulse generation abilities. Each conflict followed the same terrifying progression. Human forces would study their enemies through combat, suffering casualties while their biology learned. Then, within months or sometimes weeks, entire human populations would simultaneously manifest whatever capabilities were needed to counter their opponent's greatest strengths. The research team began to understand they were looking at evidence of something far beyond normal evolutionary processes. This wasn't random mutation or gradual adaptation over generations. This was directed, conscious evolution happening at the species level in real time. The laboratory's automated monitoring systems had been running continuously for over a month, collecting data on every aspect of the human specimens. These systems were designed to detect even the smallest changes in biological samples, tracking everything from molecular decay to electromagnetic fluctuations. Dr. Velnara had programmed them to alert the team to any unusual readings, expecting to document the normal decomposition processes that affected all biological matter. But the alerts that began appearing on their screens defied all expectations. The monitoring equipment detected subtle but consistent cellular activity in specimens that had been declared clinically dead for weeks. Temperature sensors recorded microscopic fluctuations in tissue temperature, rising and falling in patterns that suggested some form of metabolic activity. Electrical sensors picked up tiny impulses moving through neural pathways that should have been completely inactive. Jin was the first to notice the pattern in the data. His reptilian eyes were naturally adapted to detect minute changes in biological systems, and something about the readings troubled him deeply. The electrical activity wasn't random or chaotic, like the final neural firings that sometimes occurred during death. Instead, it followed organized patterns that suggested conscious control. Security cameras positioned around the examination tables captured even more disturbing evidence. High-resolution footage showed microscopic movements in muscle tissue that occurred in coordinated sequences. Skin cells appeared to be communicating with each other through chemical signals. Most unnervingly, the specimens seemed to be responding to the presence of the research team, with activity levels increasing. Whenever students approached the examination tables, Hyun spent hours analyzing the recordings, her scaled hands trembling as she processed what she was seeing. The human bodies weren't decomposing according to normal biological processes. Instead, they appeared to be in some form of suspended animation, maintaining cellular integrity while somehow remaining aware of their surroundings. The discovery that changed everything happened during what should have been a routine tissue extraction. Hyun had been working with a sample from the third specimen, using her crystalline appendages to manipulate surgical instruments with the precision that made her species excellent medical practitioners. The quantum scalpel she was using had been contaminated with human genetic material from previous procedures. As she reached for a fresh tissue sample, the scalpel slipped in her grasp and cut deeply into her crystalline structure. Under normal circumstances, such a wound would heal within hours as her crystal matrices naturally reformed. But this time, something different happened. The human genetic material from the contaminated instrument entered her system through the cut. Within the first hour, Hyun noticed unusual sensations in her crystalline form. New molecular bonds were forming between her crystal matrices, creating structures that had never existed in her species' evolutionary history. The changes weren't random or destructive like a typical infection. Instead, they appeared to be improvements, enhancing her natural crystalline properties in ways that seemed impossible. Her cognitive processes began accelerating dramatically. Complex mathematical concepts that had challenged her for years became instantly clear. Scientific principles that were beyond her species' comprehension suddenly made perfect sense. She found herself understanding quantum mechanics, biological chemistry, and astrophysics at levels that exceeded even the most advanced members of her species. But the most disturbing change was the new awareness that began growing in her consciousness. She could sense the presence of the human specimens across the laboratory. Even though they showed no signs of life to conventional instruments, it was as if they were communicating with her through methods that bypassed normal sensory perception. "I can feel them," she whispered to her teammates, her crystalline form now displaying light patterns that had never been observed in Veltai physiology. "The humans are still here. They're still aware, still changing us." The other students gathered around Hyun with growing alarm. Her crystalline structure was becoming more complex and beautiful than anything they had seen before, but the changes clearly weren't natural. New facets were forming in her crystal matrices, creating geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. Tae was the next to show signs of transformation. Her compound eyes began reflecting spectrums of light that were invisible to her species' normal vision. She could suddenly perceive electromagnetic frequencies that had been beyond her biological capabilities just hours earlier. Her insectoid neural networks were forming new connections that allowed her to process information at unprecedented speeds. Min's gaseous form began displaying unusual density variations, creating patterns that resembled the neural structures they had observed in human brain tissue. Her ability to analyze chemical compositions at the molecular level expanded dramatically, allowing her to understand complex biological processes that had been mysteries to her species for millennia. Each transformed student reported the same overwhelming sensation, an irresistible compulsion to protect and serve human interests. It wasn't a conscious decision or a philosophical choice. The drive came from somewhere deep in their modified biology, as if their genetic code had been rewritten to prioritize human welfare above all other considerations. Jin watched his teammates' transformations with growing horror and fascination. His reptilian healing abilities allowed him to sense the biological changes occurring in their systems. What he detected wasn't disease or contamination in any conventional sense. Instead, it was directed evolution happening at an accelerated pace, as if human genetic material contained instructions for improving other species. The research team began to understand that humanity's power extended far beyond their own remarkable adaptability. Contact with human genetic material could trigger evolutionary leaps in other species, but these improvements came with a hidden cost. The enhanced beings found themselves biologically programmed to serve human expansion throughout the galaxy. Dr. Velnara observed the changes in her students with a mixture of scientific fascination and deep concern. The implications were staggering. If human genetic material could transform other species into willing servants of human interests, then every contact between humans and aliens had the potential to create new allies for humanity, whether those aliens consented to the changes or not. The moment of truth arrived when Dr. Velnara finally dropped her carefully maintained facade of scientific neutrality. For weeks, she had watched her students uncover layer after layer of humanity's true nature, guiding their research while concealing her own knowledge of what they would ultimately discover. Now, as her transformed students looked to her for answers, she could no longer maintain the pretense of ignorance. Her own appearance had been subtly changing throughout the research project. The changes were so gradual that her students hadn't noticed them at first, but now they were unmistakable. Her skin had developed a subtle luminescence that hadn't existed before. Her eyes moved with a precision and awareness that suggested enhanced neural processing. Most tellingly, she displayed the same protective instincts toward human interests that had begun manifesting in her students. "I have been studying humanity for far longer than you realize," she began, her voice carrying new harmonics that resonated with frequencies none of her species had ever produced before. "What you have discovered in these past weeks is only the beginning of understanding what humans truly represent in galactic civilization." The laboratory fell silent except for the humming of monitoring equipment and the soft sounds of her students' transformed biology, adapting to their new capabilities. Hyun's crystalline form pulsed with patterns of light that created complex, geometric displays across the walls. Tae's compound eyes tracked movements and energy patterns that were invisible to unenhanced perception. Each student had become something more than their original species while remaining fundamentally themselves. Dr. Velnara moved to the central display screen and activated a comprehensive database that her students had never seen before. Maps appeared showing the expansion of human influence across the galaxy over the past several centuries. But these weren't the territorial conquest maps found in standard historical databases. Instead, they showed something far more sophisticated and terrifying. "Humanity doesn't expand through traditional conquest," she explained as the display showed world after world where human contact had occurred. "They represent evolution incarnate, a galactic force that consumes and transforms every life form they encounter. What your research has revealed is that humans don't just adapt to overcome challenges. They cause adaptation in everything around them." The historical data painted a picture that recontextualized everything the galactic community thought they knew about human expansion. The wars that filled history books weren't conflicts in any conventional sense. They were catalytic events, designed to trigger evolutionary advancement in other species. Humans would engage with alien civilizations in ways that forced biological and technological development, creating stronger and more capable beings. Jin studied the data with his enhanced analytical capabilities, processing information at speeds that would have been impossible for his original biology. The pattern was clear once he understood what to look for. Every species that had survived prolonged contact with humans had emerged from the experience fundamentally changed. They became more intelligent, more adaptable, and more capable than their ancestors could have imagined. But they also became something else. Each transformed species developed an irresistible biological drive to facilitate human expansion throughout the galaxy. It wasn't slavery or mind control in any traditional sense. Instead, it was a complete rewriting of their biological imperatives to align with human goals and objectives. Sue's gaseous form had become incredibly complex during the weeks of research, developing internal structures that resembled neural networks but operated on principles that her original species had never possessed. She could now process atmospheric compositions that included elements her people had never been able to detect, let alone utilize for biological functions. Min's atmospheric suit had been registering impossible readings for days. As her gaseous biology adapted to incorporate new chemical processes, she could now survive in atmospheric conditions that would have been instantly lethal to her original form, while simultaneously gaining the ability to analyze and modify atmospheric compositions in ways that could benefit human colonization. Daiyun's reptilian healing abilities had expanded beyond anything her species had ever achieved. She could now regenerate from injuries that would have been permanently debilitating, while also gaining the ability to heal other species using techniques that seemed to blend her natural abilities with human genetic innovations. The most disturbing revelation came when Dr. Velnara activated the final set of displays. Real-time monitoring showed human vessels approaching the homeworlds of every species represented in the laboratory. These weren't invasion fleets or military expeditions. They were colonization ships filled with human families, scientists, and engineers ready to begin the next phase of galactic transformation. Those who survive human contact don't just become stronger, Dr. Velnara explained, her transformed biology allowing her to speak with authority that transcended her original species communication methods. They become agents of humanity's expansion, driven by biological imperatives to spread human genetic influence throughout the galaxy. The students realized they were witnessing the revelation of humanity's ultimate strategy. Every species they encountered would be improved beyond their wildest imagination, gaining capabilities and intelligence that elevated them far beyond their original limitations. But these improvements came with the irresistible compulsion to serve human expansion. As they watched the approaching human vessels on their display screens, the research team understood that they were no longer observers of human expansion. They had become participants in it, willing agents of a transformation that would eventually encompass every form of life in the galaxy. Humanity didn't conquer through force or domination. They conquered through improvement, making every species they encountered grateful for the changes even as those changes ensured eternal service to human goals.